William Sila is a sign language interpreter tonight. I'm Linda Ogutu. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, the Kenyan delegation to the ICC Assembly of State Parties has just announced that all the items they proposed for discussion at the summit have been included in the agenda. Key among those items is the request for a review of the amendments to rules of procedure and evidence introduced at the last assembly. But as KTN senior political reporter Sam Mugina now reports, the Kenyan government goes to the Assembly of State Parties ready to pull out of the Rome Statute if its petition is rejected. Nairobi is lobbying against the use of Rule 68 that allowed recanted evidence to be used against Deputy President William Ruto and journalist Joshua Arapsan.
Nairobi has dispatched a high-powered political and diplomatic delegation for what it terms as a make-or-break Assembly of State Parties summit at The Hague, Kenya's brief, to lobby for the ICC to rescind the admission of Rule 68 in the Ruto and Sang case that allows for the use of recanted evidence. And the country is warning if diplomacy fails, politics shall prevail.
Ambassador Amina will not come back. She has carried the instruments for withdrawal. Not only Ambassador Amina, a number of African countries' foreign ministers and attorney generals have carried their instruments for withdrawal. But I can speak for Kenya. Ambassador Amina will take the next flight to New York and present those instruments for withdrawal to the Secretary General of the Security Council, of the UN Security Council.
The Uhuru administration feels duped by the ICC court ruling to allow admission of recanted evidence to be used against the Deputy President and Joshua Sang. Kenyan delegation claims amendment to Rule 68 allowing the use of recanted evidence was passed at the 13th session with an understanding that Rule 68 will not be applicable retrospectively in the Ruto Sang case that was already going on.
It's a global legal principle that no law applies retrospectively. Unfortunately, in this case, it has been forced to apply retrospectively. Again, we had commitment, and commitment from the entire Assembly of State Parties that that rule was not going to apply in the current cases.
Our minimum, irreducible minimum at the ICC is that we will not allow, we will reverse the usage of Rule 68. It has never been applied in any jurisdiction, any court, anywhere in the world.
Kenya's technical team, comprising of Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohamed, Kenya's permanent ambassador to the UN Kamau Macharia, and a team from the Attorney General's office held a strategic meeting at The Hague ahead of the Assembly of State Parties opening Wednesday. Kenya's moment of truth comes on Monday when it spearheads the fair trial process in the Rome Statute system. Other crucial sessions to be hosted by Kenya includes cooperation with the ICC and operationalization of the independent oversight mechanism in the Rome Statute.
We had a clear understanding in 2013 that the amendments would apply to any cases that had commenced before the date of the amendments.
But the Kenyan push has triggered a sharp reaction from the Amnesty International, which says Kenya's request on recanted evidence goes beyond the mandate of the Assembly of State Parties. Amnesty International warns that the summit should not interfere with the independence of the judiciary nor undermine the ability of the ICC court and its prosecutor to pursue justice. The Kenyan Parliament has also petitioned for the establishment of an independent bench to probe the ICC prosecution's investigations, witness and evidence collection. A petition by Pokot South Member of Parliament David Kosing. And Kenya says it will be counting on its friendly nations to pass its motion.
We will then be saying that, this is an opportunity for us to know who our friends are. We are fighting an injustice being committed to Kenyans and the ICC. If you are a true friend of Kenya, you should be able to stand with us.
Already, Kenya has warned the UK it will not renew the British Army Training Unit Kenya, but took agreement if the UK vetoes its petition. But in a statement, the British High Commission in Kenya says, quote, The two issues are not interlinked, that in fact the ICC is an independent judicial process. Kenyan Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs Amina Mohamed and UK Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond signed a statement of understanding on the Defense Cooperation Agreement in New York in September, following a positive meeting between President Uhuru Kenyatta and Prime Minister David Cameron. End of quote. Samugina, KTN News.
So the Kenyan government goes to the Assembly of State Parties ready to pull out of the Rome Statute if its petition is rejected, and that story by Samugina is the basis of our big question tonight. We're focusing on the ASP, and tonight we're asking, do you think Kenya's threat to pull out of the ICC will influence debate at the Hague Summit? Do you think Kenya's threat to pull out of the ICC will influence debate at the Hague Summit? Let us know what you think. Tweet us at KTN News, at KTN Kenya. You can tweet me directly at Linda Ogutu. You can also send a short message to the number 22155. That line is absolutely free for you. Let us know what you think. I'll be sampling them during this bulletin. The El Nino rains continued their rampage in different parts of the country. In Narok, in Kenya's Rift Valley, a family of 5 died after their house was buried following a mudslide in Oloshapani location, Narok South Sub-County. The family members were asleep in their hut at 1 a.m. when the tragedy occurred. The area has been receiving heavy rains that have led to mudslides. Authorities said the victims were a 23-year-old man, 2 little girls and 2 boys. Oloshapani location Chief John Seru said the area had been experiencing minor incidences of mudslides from the time the rain started. Narok County Governor Samuel Ole Tunai led a security team to condole the families and the victims and promised that the government would help the affected families.
Mama anapiga nduru, tukakimbia pale pale, tukaenda sasa, tukapata nyumba imesha na maji yote, watoto walikuwa ndani na watu walikuwa nasaidia, tukajaribu sasa kuokoa watu, lakini hawakusaidika. Na tunaomba serikali na tunaomba tena national county government, kama kuna pesa ambayo inasemekana ya kwamba kuna pesa ya elimu, tunataka usaidizi. Sasa serikali tunaomba isaidie. Sasa hii watu wamepeleka huko kwa mochari, sijui hata huko bichi tunaenda.
Let's stay with the floods. Residents of Maimbeni village in Ahero, Kisumu have been displaced after River Nyando burst its banks. The river burst its banks early Tuesday morning as most residents were getting up. The damage caused by the floods may persist as the rains continue. Victor Ogale has the details.
From livestock, homes to shops, all swept away by floods and rice plantations submerged. Early Tuesday morning, River Nyando burst its banks, displacing most of the residents of Maimbeni village, and there is a scare that the situation may get worse as the rains continue throughout the country. Rima Akov is the manager of this rice milling plant, but since morning her work has been in stagnation as his premises is also flooded.
Maji yameingia, mchele amesasiagwa, ameenda tu na maji yote. Hata mota maji yameingia. Sasa mimi nakaa tu hapo kwa barabara.
Hii maji vile ilinyesha sehemu za juu upande wa Muhoroni huko Nandi Hills na yaenda Kawa. Ndio maji kawa nyingi imeingia kwa nyumba, watoto imeenda, kuku imeenda.
Mimi nimepanda michele eka 3. Michele yangu yote inalala chini tu na maji. Sasa nitafanya nini serikali? Na sasa nitalipa na nini? Na maji na michele yangu nalala na maji. Na mama hindi nimepanda yote chini kwa maji. Nilikuwa nafanya kwa Japur, Ananjapur. Mimi mkulima yawa. Sasa nitafanya nini na mimi mkulima? Na watoto yangu na wamesoma kwa shule. Sasa watoto vitu yao yote naenda na nini, makitabu naenda. Mimi sasa nitafanya nini? Na mimi ni bibi yangu, mimi bwanangu alikufa.
Maji niingia asubuhi, ikaenda na vitu yote, hata pia watoto wameanguka kwenye maji, sasa wanaomba.
Meters from Punima's workstation is Diana Okilo's home that is now submerged underwater. Her neighbors have already begun salvaging their belongings. Operations in this village may take time to return to normal, going by the weatherman's prediction that heavy rains are expected to continue pounding. Many of the residents have already begun seeking alternative ways of movement as the roads have been cut off by floods.
Maji iliingia, hata kama watoto wajaenda shuleni wengine, na wengine wafunga. Tulikuwa na shida kabisa, hata wengine walala kwa mateshao na maji.
Vile tulikuja asubuhi, tumepata kama mchele yenye tumesiaga yote, mchele yenye tumepaga imeenda na maji yote, hakuna hata moto yetu imeenda yote. Hata chakula ya leo hakuna hata vile tutafanya.
Despite the county government of Kisumu having put measures in place to mitigate effects of flooding, it seems the amount of rainfall may be too much for the Nyando ecosystem. Victor Ogale, KTN News, in the county of Kisumu.
The warnings were given by the weatherman. The rains are here and they're indeed causing a havoc. We'll still keep an eye on the El Nino rains for you and report on the developments all over the country, not just in the country, in the entire region as well, because that warning was given not just for Kenya but for the entire region as well. Still in Kenya, 9 members of Geothermal Development Company Tender Committee were today charged in a Nairobi court with abuse of office in awarding a 43 million shilling tender in 2012. The 9 denied all 7 charges before the court slapped 2 of the accused with a cash bail of 8 million shillings each.
The 9 are alleged to have been in a committee that failed to comply with the law on procurement and inappropriately influenced evaluation in signing and approving a multi-million contract tender. Led by the company secretary Praxidis Mbai and the managing director Silas Simiu, the 9 denied the charges, absolving themselves from any blame attached to a procurement flaw that saw the awarding of a tender for rig move services. The value was 42,746,000 per rig drill, totaling to 1.7 billion shillings awarded to Bonafide Clearing and Forwarding Limited in 2012. All 9 directors insisting through their lawyers that due diligence was observed in the tendering process. Silas Simiu and Praxidis Mbai faced separate additional charges of abuse of office and failing to ensure proper management of public funds in the deal, charges they all denied before the court.
We are asking you to consider the amount for cash bail and an alternative.
The accused applied to be released on reasonable terms, which were set at 8 million shillings cash bail for Simiu and Mbai and 5 million shillings each for the rest, a directive that was vehemently opposed by the defense lawyers.
This is the first time to hear a bail of 8 million shillings. This prosecution policy has been there. It has not come into force today. That policy has been applied by all other courts. And the treatment of these accused persons speaks of a conspiracy. Conspiracy to defeat ends of justice.
The defense teams argued that by setting such unprecedented terms, the court was in essence delivering judgment in a case that was yet to be heard. Chief Magistrate Kennedy Bidali was however adamant that the amounts set are in line with judiciary's bail and bond guidelines.
We will move to the High Court during that interim period. So until then, the accused persons will be remanded in custody until the cash bail is paid.
The aggrieved parties vowed to make an appeal at a higher court and declined to take up any hearing dates until their grievances were heard by the High Court of Kenya. Timothy Otieno, KTN News.
Aside from the GDC bosses, the Kenyan Director of Prosecutions had also recommended the prosecution of the National Youth Service Director General Nelson Githinji and the Devolution Permanent Secretary Peter Mangeti on corruption allegations and abuse of office. But the Kenyan opposition leader Raila Odinga has dismissed these recommendations as an attempt by the government to cover up and to ensure the biggest culprits are protected from prosecution. Raila claims Peter Mangeti and Nelson Githinji are mere fall guys being taken down to save the actual suspects. Raila has called it a cover-up and a conspiracy against the law and the taxpayers. He wants the cabinet secretary in the devolution ministry to take responsibility for what went wrong at the National Youth Service. He also wants an independent international audit firm to be appointed to look into the NYS transactions and accounts and all tender procurement and payment since April 2013. Let's see how that goes. You're watching KTN Prime, and we thank you for staying with us. Let's focus on a big question before we take a short break. Tonight we're asking you, do you think Kenya's threat to pull out of the ICC will influence debate at the Hague Summit? Let us know what you think. Tweet us at KTN News, at KTN Kenya. You can tweet me directly at Linda Ogutu. You can also send a short message to the number 22155. Begin with a yes or no, so that I'll be able to sort of poll your results, poll your responses, and I'll be able to read them at the bottom end of this bulletin. We're taking a break. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with KTN Prime. Let's now turn our attention on the war on terror. A suspected Al-Shabaab militant was wounded while another sustained serious gunshot wounds following a 30-minute gun battle with KDF soldiers in Kenya's Garissa County. The two suspects were allegedly spotted near the KDF camp in Garissa, raising suspicion from the soldiers on guard, who immediately engaged them in a shootout. Moimi Mwangi has the details.
These heightened security checks were the aftermath of the gunfight. That for 30 minutes literally turned Garissa town into a battle zone. This after two suspected Al-Shabaab militants were allegedly spotted spying near the KDF camp in Garissa, prompting an officer at the sentry to open fire after allegedly realizing that the suspects were armed, setting off the gun battle that spread across the town as the suspects scampered for safety. In the ensuing gun battle, one of the suspects was seriously wounded and is said to be recuperating under tight security at the Garissa Referral Hospital, while his accomplice escaped with gunshot wounds. An AK-47 rifle was recovered during the incident. Earlier this year, Kenyan security agencies battled the Al-Shabaab militants in a similar gun battle during an operation to rescue a Kenyan teacher who had been kidnapped by the militants from Garissa. The operation was successfully carried out by a combined squad of the KDF and officers from the Rapid Deployment Unit at Shabadifu area, 15 kilometers inside Somalia. Muremi Mwangi, KTN News, Nairobi.
Right, listen, we'll have a bigger conversation on the war on terror and indeed global terror immediately after this bulletin that is on KTN News on Worldview. You need to stay with us to be part of that conversation. Let's cross borders now, and at least 11 people were killed and 12 others wounded Monday when a gunfight broke out in Somalia between rival security forces as they waited for cards for food aid. That is according to the police. Witnesses said the dead included children as well as elderly men and women. Lillian Odera reports.
Clinging on to dear life, the pain of women, children and men whose only crime was to kill for their regular food rations at a camp for internally displaced persons. Shooting broke out at an IDP camp in Afgoe corridor, where thousands of people live in dire conditions along a key route leading northwest from Mogadishu. The camp houses people fleeing militant group Al-Shabaab, drought, and the country's long-running conflict. Witnesses say the shooting began after rival Somali security forces argued over who was in charge. I went to a nearby camp where food ration cards were going to be distributed. Then government soldiers clashed and opened fire, killing my small son and injuring my hand. I also saw many wounded and dead people on the ground. United Nations envoy to Somalia, Nick Kay, said he was shocked at shooting of civilians, queuing for food rations, and added that perpetrators must face justice. It was not immediately clear what sparked the fighting between the rival forces. As soon as I arrived at the camp, shooting broke out and I was wounded. I know that many people were killed, but I don't know the number. The area is under the control of the government after the Al-Qaeda-linked Shabab were driven out of Afgoye in 2012. Tens of thousands of people who have fled war as well as hunger amid poor rains in some areas and floods elsewhere live in basic camps in and around the capital. Lilian Odera, KTN News.
Let's bring you back into the country. Kenyans and the media fraternity will soon have a right to access information held by the government ministries and other public authorities without any hindrance. Well, this is thanks to the Access to Information Bill 2015, currently before a parliamentary committee. However, the bill clearly spells out circumstances under which information may be withheld. For instance, where such information is likely to undermine the national security of Kenya.
The Access to Information Bill 2015 was formally introduced on the floor of the House in September by Nyeri County Woman Representative Priscilla Nyokabi. The bill seeks to give effect to Article 35 of the Constitution by quickening access to information held by government ministries and other public authorities. The National Assembly's Committee on Information and Communication Technology has been collecting views from the public and various interested parties on the bill before it's taken back to the House for the second reading. The Media Council of Kenya and Editors Guild gave their input.
We really have no major issues with clauses of the bill, and this bill will enable our work as journalists be better going forward, because we can now write to the ministries and other public officers and even private entities that we are seeking information, and they must avail that information in a very candid way within specific time, which is 21 days, I think.
We want to assure you that indeed your views are key to making sure that this bill gets to see the light of the day and comes out in the best way for the best interest of Kenyans.
Once enacted, it is expected to enhance transparency, accountability and good governance. Citizens will be able to know what is going on within government and be able to expose corruption and mismanagement. For instance, the bill compels the state to disclose information that relates to the powers and duties of its officers and employees, procedures followed in the decision-making processes, including channels of supervision and accountability, and salary scales of its officers. Such information will be key while engaging the public in auditing lifestyles of government employees or where blame game is involved in matters graft like the NYS saga. Private bodies and non-state actors that provide public services and are in possession of information which is of significant public interest due to its relation to the protection of human rights, the environment or public health and safety, or to exposure of corruption or illegal actions shall be compelled to reveal the information on request. However, the bill states that information may be withheld by a public entity or private body where it is satisfied that disclosure of such information is likely to undermine the national security of Kenya, such as military strategy or deployment and intelligence activities. Other likely scenarios to withhold information include where such information would impede the due process of law, involve the unwarranted invasion of the privacy of an individual, and or infringe on commercial interests, including intellectual property rights of that entity. But the bill states that a public entity or private body may be required to disclose information where the public interest in disclosure outweighs the harm to protected interests. Lack of Access to Information Act has allowed civil servants to use bureaucratic red tape to conceal information under the pretext of national security.
It has been very difficult accessing information from government because we have a law that under the Official Secrets Act that makes it very difficult for us to access information which is critical to the public. In the recent weeks, you've seen the challenges we've had with dealing with matters corruption, and we have been accused of lynching some public officers.
Indeed, this bill, as you say, is extremely important in this country. Access to information. But of course, also this bill also needs to come with data protection bill, which is also underway. And I think as soon as it comes for the House, we will also call you again for your views, which we believe will also be able to incorporate in the bill, so that when it becomes an act of parliament, then eventually everybody will be satisfied.
Under the bill, a chief executive officer of a public entity shall be an information access officer. An application to access information shall be made in English or Kiswahili, but in cases of illiteracy or disability, the request may be made orally. A public officer shall make a decision on an application as soon as possible or within 21 days of receipt of the application. But when the information sought concerns the life or liberty of a person, the information shall be provided within 48 hours or not later than 15 working days where the application is complex or relates to a large volume of information. Patrick Amimo, KTN News.
So the Kenyan delegation to the Assembly of State Parties has just announced that all the items they proposed for discussion at the summit have been included in the agenda. So tonight on KTN Prime, we are asking you, do you think Kenya's threat to pull out of the ICC will influence debate at the Hague summit? Paul Mwani says Kenya must subject it to the referendum and Kenyans should have a final yes, final say. Fit Nandinya says, right, Millicent Wangui says yes, in fact that decision will greatly affect the DP's case. Frederick Okango says Kenya's threats are inconsequential and will not in any way affect the cases at the ICC. Kipkorir Arab Menjo says threats will never reverse a legal process unless the court encourages impunity. Finally, Sang Cosma says yes, ICC would be counting losses if Kenya pulls out of the ICC. Just some of your feedback on our big question tonight. Keep tweeting, keep texting. The number is 22155. Twitter handle at KTN Kenya, at KTN News, at Linda Ogutu. I'll be sampling some of your views during this bulletin. So we're taking a short break, and when we get back, I'll have the day's business news for you. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's look at business now. The Central Bank's Monetary Policy Committee met this afternoon to review the country's monetary policy as banks withdraw notices of higher interest rates. And despite pressure from the government, the bank retained its benchmark lending rate at 11.5%. Adelaide Chongole tells us more.
The second half of the year has witnessed an unprecedented amount of central bank intervention in the market as the CBK worked to tame the runaway shilling, which was approaching the historic low of 107 shillings to the dollar. Combined with a 300 basis point increase in the benchmark lending rate in June and July to 11.5%, the central bank also stepped up its mop-up operations to reduce liquidity and boost the struggling shilling. As a result of the interventions, the shilling stabilized at the 102 shilling mark, while the country's inflation levels have remained well within the 2.5 to 7.5 CBK target. But as stability emerged, so has the pressure on the central bank to unwind the tightening stance.
Since they have rule with respect to the interest rates, with respect to the inflation, which is far much below the target, there is obviously room to unwind this situation gradually in a way that we continue to have, liquidity in the system without, creating any, challenge.
However, the central bank has shaken off this pressure, retaining the benchmark rate at 11.5% for the fourth month in a row as it seeks to anchor inflation expectations, which have jumped from 5.92% in September to 6.72% in October. The bank also sought to ensure the stability of the exchange rate, particularly given the falling treasury bill rates, which have fallen from 23% to 9.67% last week.
The last thing we want is a sort of sudden instability in the other markets.
With the decision, CBK appeared to have read from the IMF playbook, which had cautioned against knee-jerk reaction to the monetary policy, saying there was no need to adjust rates downwards, only to adjust them upwards again in a few months.
So if interest rates go down very quickly and then they pick up again, that will create a lot of uncertainty and damage to the credibility of policies.
However, the move to retain the rate at 11.5% will come at a steep cost to manufacturers who have had to contend with higher borrowing rates owing to the upward adjustment of the KBRR, a move that has curbed credit appetite and inhibited growth of the economy. The World Bank now wants the government and the central bank to clearly define their strategy in this high interest rate environment and their planned end game, as opposed to leaving Kenyans and businesses guessing.
For a manufacturer, and he'll tell you he's interested in working capital. He can decide just to decide to close down and put his money in the treasury bill rate.
Adelaide Changole, KTN Business.
Okay, so in the first part of our two-part series on the making of Safaricom, we profiled Michael Joseph and what it took to build the most profitable company in the region. On the second part of Texpo, the making of Safaricom, current Chief Executive Bob Collymore spoke to KTN's Joy Doreen Bira on sustaining the company's profits 5 years after succeeding Michael Joseph. Listen in.
My character is suited to building a company. And I believe I was not the right character. My character was not right for running a mature company.
After Michael Joseph handed over to Bob Collymore, the pressure to deliver was high, with questions abounding as to whether he would fit in his predecessor's shoes and In 2011, Safaricom got out of his shell and started the Mykono Safaricom live countrywide concerts, Safaricom Marathon and Half Marathon, but Bob never took his eye from the ball, ensuring that he maintained the tradition of super profits. And in 2012, the firm unveiled Mshwari and began doing sustainability reporting. This report was the first to be launched by a telco in East Africa and was yet another feature on Bob Collymore's hat.
I don't think that our actions are yet adequate. I think there's still quite a lot to be done. But if you start to report on it, it means you have to measure it. And if you're measuring it, you're managing it.
In 2013, the company rolled out in limited detail to its customers a decision that turned out to be one of the mistakes Bob Collymore made.
And the reason for that is because like 5% of data users, not just of our own data users, was using 70% of the capacity. And so everything started to collapse. And so very quickly we made the decision to say, no more, we're not going to do it.
As the company marks 15 years in Kenya this year, its competitors in the industry have openly argued that Safaricom's dominance in the market was a hindrance to competition. Some have even threatened to quit the Kenyan market if something is not done to rectify the situation.
And even I remember the times when we launched 3G. As soon as the regulator said, you've got $25 million for a 3G license, I was at the regulator and I gave them a check. My competitors, they waited 2 years. We spent $10 million on M-Pesa in our first year. Nobody made that investment. Even our competitors this day have not made that investment.
Due respect to my customers, 25 million, they have chosen to go with a company that does charge in some cases a slightly higher price, but they also understand the value that we bring to them as well as to society.
Going forward, Bob Collymore and Michael Joseph still see Safaricom growing thanks to constant innovation, partnerships and collaborations.
I'd like to leave the company in a slightly better position in terms of integrity than I found it. I don't think that I'll ever be able to clean it up completely, but I'd like a company that really understands what values are.
In its full-year results for the year ended March 31st, 2015, Safaricom announced a 38% increase in net profit to 32 billion Kenya shillings. Joy Doreen Bira, Texpo, KTN.
Welcome back. Let's look at sports now and focus on a story that has been the subject on social media for the better part of the day. Football Kenya Federation Chairman Sam Nyamweya was questioned for 8 hours by the Criminal Investigation Department this afternoon, a day after the national team delayed departing for 2018 World Cup qualifier match against Cape Verde. Harambee Stars are away in Cape Verde and is playing the Islanders tonight.
As Kenya's national soccer team Harambee Stars prepare to take on Sharks of Cape Verde hours after arriving to the island state, football chairman Sam Nyamwea was being taken to the Nairobi area police headquarters for questioning. Nyamwea was questioned for close to 8 hours as journalists were kept at arm's length. After the 8 hours ordeal, the Federation chairman left the station in a half. He remained tight-lipped as he was whisked away from the station. The Nairobi CD boss Eric Mwende said he grilled Nyamwea over the Stars' delayed trip to Cape Verde for their return leg World Cup qualifier. The sports ministry at the center of the Stars' almost collapsed trip to Cape Verde will also be summoned to shed more light on the Stars' trip. However, Nyamwea distanced himself from reports that he had been arrested and insists that he took himself to the police station to explain his side of the story. He blames the sports ministry for the delayed departure of the national soccer team.
The unprecedented move to suspend Russia from international track and field competitions due to an explosive report by the World Anti-Doping Agency alleging state-sponsored doping continues to cast a dark shadow on Kenyan athletics scene. In Kenya's Rift Valley region, famous for churning out champion runners from high-altitude training camps, there are fears of a similar ban following calls for the World Anti-Doping Agency to shift its focus to Kenya.
The call for WADA to shift its focus on Kenya has fueled anxiety in a region where children still trudge to school barefoot, and most hotels, large houses and flashy German cars belong to athletes who use running as a road out of poverty. In the last few years, 33 Kenyan runners have failed drug tests, including Rita Cheptoo, winner of the Boston and Chicago marathons. Recently, 2 Kenyans failed doping tests in August at the Beijing World Championships, where Kenya topped the medals table. In the training camps of Iten, many resent a cloud of suspicion that now hangs over all Kenyan runners.
They will start to question the performance of even the clean athletes. And when they start to question, they find that it will not be interesting so much. If you run very well, other guys who are not well informed in athletics or in the sport, they will think that, oh, even this one is using drugs.
Former world record holder Wilson Kipsang does agree with the World Anti-Doping Agency sentiments that Kenyan authorities have been slow to act, adding that there is fear Kenya could suffer the same fate as Russia.
And will really take an action. If IOC will take an action and maybe ban Kenya, I think it will be so unfortunate.
As speculations on what may befall Kenya continue, the blame game on who is responsible for Kenya's doping issues continue.
European and white coaches in Kenya. That is the next thing that the government needs to do. Let's have foreigners as agents, but not foreigners as coaches. Because we don't know what these foreigners are doing for athletes. It is better for us because also if you have a foreigner, you cannot arrest them. They can run away and go to their country.
However, speaking to KTN, Federico Rosa of Rosa Associates Athletes Management Company rubbished accusations that foreign coaches and managers are promoting the vice among Kenyan athletes.
Yeah, you know very well. It's organized by local authorities. They go after athletes. It has nothing to do with the power, with the federation. They can protect it, try to show the pressure. I don't think that will be a case for Kenya, absolutely.
The Rosa Associate Management was previously suspended from operating in the country after recording a high number of failed drug tests. The management has, however, been reinstated with no report issued by Athletics Kenya following an alleged investigation.
We have been for a while under investigation and we are 100% as I was sure that I can.
Habil says, let's join hands and get rid of this ICC monster na tuendelee kujenga nchi, but politicians should behave. Gigs, yule mmoja says, the evidence was recanted, the working report was shoddy and well orchestrated, Kenya should pull out. Prince V says, no, I don't think those threats will influence the continuity of the cases at the summit. Rama Lyric says, yes, that is very definite, but let's wait and see. Sylvester Aura says, Kenya was a member of the ICC when its citizens were indicted. Pulling out will not save Deputy President Ruto and Sang. Finally, Kennedy Wandera says, Kenya's efforts are just last kicks of a dying horse. So Suji is a strong character. That strategy is designed to fail. Those are just some of your feedback on the question that we asked you today. We thank you for writing in, for being part of KTN Prime. Have a good night. For those of you on KTN News, Worldview begins now. We're looking at terrorism. We're looking at the global terror threat that faces the entire world, focusing on the attack that just happened in France. You can be part of that conversation. You can watch that on DSTV channel 274, Zuku channel 14, GoTV channel 94. I'd love to read some of your tweets on what you think about the war on terror. Good night. I'm Linda Ogutu.